contract award and contract execution in extractive sector, particularly the activities of the NNPC in the management of Nigeria oil and gas. Today, we think that it's going to be interactive, and we are going to have people to call in and have their view on what they think about the activities of NNPC and the importance of transparency in the extractive sector.
Okay, concerning the extractive sector, has Nigeria achieved transparency in the extractive sector? Should we say Nigeria has achieved transparency?
The issue is, even with the Petroleum Industry Act that was actually formulated to ensure transparency in the way NNPC carried its responsibility, that act has not been able to get NNPC to do the right thing in terms of transparency and accountability in the way it manages its resources. However, we also have the Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act is a law that makes every public office in this country to be transparent and to make information accessible to the public. But the frustrating thing ever is that we have NETI, and have NETI, the act establishing NETI in 2007 also makes it obligatory for NETI to work in conjunction with NNPC to make its dealings open to the public. But unfortunately, however, even as we speak, good number of Nigerians, even the NNPC itself, even the petroleum minister itself, the Minister of Petroleum, sometimes was on AIT, it was on China television, and they were asking him some fundamental questions that he can't provide answers. So for the question whether we've done well in the area, whether NNPC or whether we have done well in the area of extractive industry, in the area of transparency in extractive industry, to that question, of course, relative effort has been made, but we have not done well. NNPC itself continues to be an opaque company, opaque entity that has not been able to today to come out clean to say, well, we have done well, to say, well, this is the reality of what happens. Most people have accused them of cooking the books. And for whether we have done well, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, thank you for that. What are the major challenges, if there are any, what are the major challenges you think are impeding the transparency in the extractive sector?
Well, I think that the major challenge that impedes transparency in the extractive sector are the key players. And when I talk about the key players, I'm talking in terms of both state and non-state actors. You see that there is too much government interest. That's why you have people that have a conversation about, they talk about the cabal. There is too much government interest. The people in the extractive sector, particularly in oil and gas, are people, because of the interest they benefit, they have practically made it impossible for this sector to be transparent. Of course, you see, when you have a conversation around the issue of even refinery, you can see about last week or thereabout, or this week or thereabout, you could see Dangote coming out to say that there are people who are frustrating his plan to own or to refine crude. So the challenge, therefore, of course, we have laws in this country. We have the Freedom of Information Act. We have the Petroleum Industry Act. We have the Physical Responsibility Act. We have the Procurement Act. These are legislations, these are laws that have actually put in place to achieve transparency in oil and gas and even other extractive sector. But because there is too much interference, which I call what's this now? Which I call vested interest. The state, even the state itself, is not even interested. Is not even sincere in opening up the sector. Don't forget that before now, Nigerian state has awarded what do they call it now? Nigerian state has awarded licenses to people to come to own to build refineries. Till today, they didn't come on board. So the conversation around extractive sector, it's been frustrating because there are a lot of cabal, there are a lot of people who have the money. Vested interest is too much. And until the state itself comes up to say, guys, enough of the vested interest. We need to open this sector. We need to run this sector until the state takes that decision. I am sorry that whatever the law will put in place is not likely, to achieve its aim because the state holds the compass. The state is the fulcrum where everything rises and falls.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Liberty. NNPCs concerning contract awards. NNPC is the center of contract awards in the oil and gas sector. Has the company followed the procurement process in the contract award and how transparent is she to Nigeria in the way it manages the oil and gas?
Well, I think that I may have answered that question in my previous conversation. The truth is, NNPC has not been transparent in the award of contract. For instance, we have had lot of contracts awarded for the turnaround maintenance. I think in 2023, I think that the National Assembly also wanted to probe NNPC in spending about 16 trillion for the turnaround maintenance of refineries, and who are the owners of this. How were these contracts awarded? Because there are procurement processes, and in these procurement processes, you should be able to do open bid. And when you do this open bid, the people who have the requisite qualification should come in, and when they come in, we should be able to see on the pages of newspaper the processes that led to the selection of those who have the capacity to do this thing. But we have seen often than not, of course, we at the level of MAWA Foundation, we wrote to NNPC to say that you have awarded contract for CNG. That we need to see the processes at which you awarded this contract. We need to see the procurement processes. NNPC responded to us by saying that the Petroleum Industry Act has made it a private company, and because it has made it a private company, it's not responsible it's not accountable to individual because it's now a private entity. But that's not true, because it cannot claim to be a private entity because NNPC itself, who are the board of the directors, NNPC is not a private entity. And why did they say that? They said that because they are not interested in opening their books. I am not sure. In 2018, when I was working at the Publish What You Pay as a communication officer, then we had in so many occasions written to NNPC. NNPC doesn't respond to Freedom of Information Act. NNPC doesn't see itself as being responsible to the Nigerian state. NNPC sees itself as being responsible to the state. And when I mean the state, I mean to the presidency. And to the question, has NNPC done well in the area of transparency in the way it awards a contract? My opinion is that NNPC has not done well. If you look at the importation of importation of refined crude and exportation of crude. The question is, how transparent, in how many Nigerians today can come out and say that we know the companies that import refined crude, in refined petroleum in this country, and we know the companies that export crude. So this conversation around NNPC, whether it has done well or not, it hasn't done well, but that is not supposed to continue, because there needs to be transparency in conversation or in the way NNPC handles its dealings, the way NNPC handles the oil that belongs to the Nigerian state, because the oil itself belongs to the citizens, not NNPC, not the president, not the political, not any other person, but the citizen ought to know, because it's a collective ownership of the citizen. And most importantly, it is that it's also the mainstay of Nigerian revenue. And if it is the mainstay of Nigerian revenue, citizens ought to know how are this business done, and they ought to ask questions. And when they ask questions, they deserve response and they deserve answers.
Thank you, Mr. Audu. Okay. PIA is targeted at addressing transparency, right?
Yeah,
In the oil and gas sector.
yeah.
Has the legislation been able to achieve that?
You see, the PIA is Petroleum Industry Act. The argument of Petroleum Industry Act, and this is why this is a place I expect. We expect that those in the civil society need to come and have participatory conversation, participatory communication, participatory dialogue. They need to be constructive engagement with strategic stakeholders to come and look at this now. The Petroleum Industry Act was actually meant to address the corruption, address the lack of transparency in oil and gas, particularly in the extractive industry, particularly the oil and gas. Unfortunately, however, despite, in short, sometimes 2023 or 2022, I was in a meeting where one of the persons from NNPC was in that meeting, and his argument was, and I was shocked when he made mention that when they passed the PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, that it gave room for the old Petroleum Act to still exist for the next 35 years. What that means is that despite the fact that we've been able to pass the Petroleum Industry Act, which also ought to have addressed the problem in oil and gas, no achievement have been made. I just told you that NNPC itself, who's supposed to obey the Petroleum Industry Act, who's supposed to ensure that the Petroleum Industry Act, its provision is achieved regarding opening up the sector, is the same NNPC that told us, having written them using our lawyer Femi Falana, that to tell us how they have carried its activity. The same NNPC had written to say the Petroleum Industry Act has made it a private company, and because it has made it a private company, it cannot and is not responsible and is not accountable to the Nigerian people. So if you have NNPC who believes that a legislation that ought to make it to transparent to the people, accountable to the people, is coming to tell you that some legislation does not allow it to be transparent and accountable to the people. It therefore means that we need to revisit that legislation and discuss about how that legislation, either the shortcomings, or make NNPC itself to understand that the legislation didn't, I say, that it's a private company. That legislation only tried to make NNPC open to public scrutiny that will ensure transparency and accountability. And to the question proper, has that done well in the opening of the extractive sector? For me, Petroleum Industry Act is fantastic, but it has not, the application hasn't been there. My fear, however, our fear, however, is that let Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, not just be like any other legislation we have seen in this country, that the Child Right Act or another kind of legislation, that all what we do is that when we have legislation, we can put it on the shelf. In short, in this country, we have Procurement Act, We have Fiscal Responsibility Act. Procurement Act is the legislation that addresses corruption in procurement processes. But there is no law in this country that has been abused by Procurement Act. And I don't know how many persons that have been convicted for that. Our concern is that let TIA not be that kind of legislation that we just did it for political reasons, but application is zero.
Thank you, Mr. Liberty, for that. And to what extent are the host communities involved in the extractive deal?
Well, this also takes me to the conversation about participatory communication. You see, often host communities are not even involved in discussion about the extraction in their place. And in some places where they pretend to have done that, they just get what we call local elites, you know, whose voice dominates the conversation. And this is why there's a growing conversation about women in the extractive sector. Who represents the women? Who represent the kids, the children? And what is the understanding of the host community? What is even going on? How many communities in Niger Delta have actually had a conversation in what is going on? Let's take Buhari for instance. Now, if you go to Moko for instance, and if you go to other parts of Buhari for instance, if you go to Papi for instance, if you go to Kuje for instance, there are Chinese companies who are mining. These Chinese companies are mining. Now, the question is, how many of these companies, how many of the indigenous members, indigenous communities have had conversation? What is the level of engagement in those communities can define community development agreement? That's what they call community development agreement. What is the kind of community development agreement signed by these companies to say, because we mine in this community, at the end of the year, this is what this community gets? Well, we don't have that conversation. The only thing we say is that, well, perhaps they may be able to get hold of the traditional ruler, find a way to settle him, or find a way to settle some powerful individuals. Or perhaps you see some strong youths, some youths who think they have the capacity, maybe could just go and block road one that start making, or they say, come and say. So there is no participatory communication. We do not engage with the community stakeholders to have an understanding how the natural resource deposits in their land is being utilized. You don't just wake up one day and see some group of persons mining, taking away mineral deposit. And the only person they must have spoken to is maybe they have spoken to FCTA, maybe they must have just spoken to the local government chairman, or probably the Minister of Mine. So you don't really have the understanding. So for the conversation is that we do not have that conversation. In short, the only time we even have most of this conversation is when there's a conflict. Go to Kogi State. This is the conversation going on. There's a crisis in Kogi State. Communities are complaining. They are not engaging the communities. The same thing is go to Ebonyi State. These are communities that they are mining. In 2014, I was in Plateau State. I was in Refit in Plateau State to look at the tin mining in Plateau State. I had the conversation with people. They were not consulted. People were taking away tin. The only conversation here are government people, but that's not supposed to be. There need to be participatory communication, because the people need to understand this is a natural resource, a free gift of God to them. A free gift from God to them. They are stakeholders. They hold major stake on how those resources are being exploited, how those resources are being processed, how the money gotten from those resources can be used. Because you are even supposed to have community fund, and in community fund, resources gotten from that community ought to be channeled back to the development of that community. That's how it should be.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aldo Oseni. Do you think Nigeria has achieved transparency in the extractive sector?
I think that I think this is one of the questions I actually addressed from the beginning. Nigeria, uh, Nigeria has not. Though if you speak to government representatives, they will tell you yes, we have. If it depending on the table you're sitting, but the truth is, you see the problem. The why refineries aren't working in this country today is as a result of failure in the transparency in the way we manage our natural resources. It is about primitive capitalist accumulation and which I call boutique capitalism. Do you understand? And because some people just feel that they have the connection and let's appropriate public uh, resources, public revenue, and we don't have, and this is why the states has always had this conversation that we cannot pay subsidy. And the conversation about fuel subsidy is that we can't pay. And the solution to fuel subsidy is that we should remove subsidy. Nobody, let me not say nobody, a good number of persons, even within the political elites and even some market fundamentalists, are not asking the real question. We know that subsidy is huge, but why are we not having conversation on transparency and accountability? Why are we not asking the real question to deal with the corruption in subsidy? Is it true that the kind of corruption we have seen in subsidy is the kind of corruption that really exists, or is a corruption that's made up by people to just take money? So we need to have that conversation. It is when you have that conversation that you have to come out, clearly to know whether subsidy really exists or not. To the question, the Nigerian state has not really done well in the issue of transparency in the extractive sector, and that is why we are where we are. In short, if you go to Sokoto, if you go to Kano, if you go to Kebbi, there's conversation that people are mining gold, and the people who are mining gold there, who are the owners? So at a point in time, there was a narrative that the issue of the issue of bandits in Katsina, in northwest states, among the northwest states, is because the discovery of gold mining. Now the question is now, who are the owners of the mining field? Who are the people? Who are the actors? These are conversations. Even if you get together, is those is still benefiting the communities where those goes where mining are taking place. So these are the conversation, and this conversation all lies, all boils down in our conversation about transparency and accountability in our extractive sector. But let me say that even as we have conversation about transparency and accountability, counter, trans, transparency does not equal accountability. Transparency means that, okay, Miss Queen, I have collected 50 million today. That's transparency. No, when I come to the website to say, as a government, to say that today we have gotten say 10 billion as revenue allocation, that is transparency. But where the work lies is accountability. Telling me that you have gotten 10 billion is transparency, but where the work lies is accountability. What did you do with the 10 billion? That is accountability. That is where the government, individuals, aren't interested to have conversation about, because the state will come and tell you, oh, today we have gotten 10 billion from the revenue allocation. Congratulations, that is transparency. State has told you that. But the issue is, what has happened to accountability? Can you come to tell us the 10 billion you have announced through your transparency process? Can you come and account what you did with it? That is accountability. So that in development conversation and in development communication, that is where the issues lie, and that's where we should be having real conversation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aldu. But concerning the transparency, what do you think are the ways Nigeria can achieve transparency?
Well, you see, the one of the things I tell people, I'm not you cannot love legislation alone. can't give you transparency and accountability. The only way we can achieve transparency and accountability is through active citizens. And the citizens must ask questions. You'll be shocked that if you take sample, or if you take sample, or if you don't want to take past sample, you do case study and pick out 2 communities in Buhari Area Council to have a conversation about the number of citizens that have studied the amount of money that gets to Buhari Area Council every month. You may be shocked that it's only like 0.9 or 1%. So citizens don't even care. So we need to understand that the only way to get transparency and accountability is through active citizens that engage in governance and ask proper questions. And until you have active citizens that have this awareness, that demand to ask, oh, you have collected this money, tell us what you do with our money. Nothing's gonna change. There is no country in the world that people just wake up to start doing the right thing if people do not ask. So the only way for us to achieve transparency and accountability is engage. Citizens engagement. It's not about laws. It's not about making beautiful laws. There's nothing wrong with our constitution. There's nothing wrong with our law. It's the application that matters. And those applications have to be addressed through citizen engagement, through citizen participation. People shouldn't sit on the fence. Don't sit on the fence. It is your stake. All of us must have that conversation. You must ask your leader, what are you doing or what have you done? How did you utilize the resources given to you? Until you begin to ask that question, you're not going to get quick answers. But don't think that if I ask, they will not ask. Keep asking. Don't think they are not hearing you. Just keep asking. You will get answers along the line.
Thank you, Mr. Odun. Our studio lines are open for questions and contributions. You can call 081 377 18319. I'll take that again. 081 377 18319. The second number to call is 091 22 43 1328.
Thank you. But just to say that thank you for your call, thank you for your contribution, but to say that you don't have access, you have access in so many ways. You can reach them through their Twitter handle. You can reach them through. You can write a letter and send to the office. You can use Freedom of Information Act to leverage on Freedom of Information Act to ask questions, and they will provide answers. So you can even organize town hall meetings. You can mobilize. You can organize. There's what we call community organizing. You can organize and have common agenda to ask questions. We can do different things. Let us not think that they are not hearing us. They are hearing us, and they will answer us. It is the people that have this conversation, and the conversation, the demand for the change of the system, not through violent revolution, but through citizens' engagement and conversation on how this needs to be done. And until we do this, we are not likely to get the kind of state we want. There is no country in the world that people just sat down and watched leaders do the right thing, and the leader did. There is citizen engagement. There must be national conversation on what needs to be done or what needed to be done. Until we have that national conversation, until you have that citizen dialogue, until you have people who stand to say that this ought to be not to be done, it's not gonna done. It's not gonna be done. So don't forget, even in your house, If every day your son or your daughter comes home 10 p.m., 11 p.m. every day, and you don't see anything wrong in that, time comes when the child doesn't come back at all. Therefore, you need to set the rule and to say, look, in my house, this is what ought to be done, and this is what ought not to be done. So, citizen engagement is fundamental and central. We must not take it for granted. That is where the conversation lies. That is where we get what we want. Nobody will change Nigeria for us. We are the citizens that will steer the conversation, constructive engagement, constructive conversation, letting them know. And in this engagement, that is why one of my callers from Gwagwalada made mention of education. This is where the education comes in now. We must have citizens that are well informed, that can engage, because education itself is empowerment. When you have enough education about the happenings, you can actively and constructively engage.